Jasmine and Jerome Washington stand frozen at the gate as armed airport security approaches, tears streaming down Jasmine's face as she clutches her college acceptance letter. Flight attendant Heather smirks behind them. Their father Malcolm's private jet lands unexpectedly at the terminal. Security radios crackle with confusion. Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If you believe in justice and standing up against discrimination, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to see more stories about people fighting back against unfair treatment. Now, let's find out how these twins ended up in this terrifying situation and what happens when their powerful father arrives. The morning had started with such promise. 17-year-old twins Jasmine and Jerome Washington sat at the breakfast table in their Atlanta home passports and tickets spread before them. This would be their first solo flight to Boston to visit Spelman and Morehouse colleges, a trip they had been looking forward to for months. "You both have everything you need," Malcolm Washington asked, pouring himself another cup of coffee. At 45, Malcolm carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had built something substantial from nothing. Starting as an airport baggage handler, 20 years ago, he had steadily built Washington Logistics into one of the Southeast's premier transportation companies. "Yes, Dad," for the 10th time, Jasmine said, rolling her eyes affectionately. "We've got our tickets, IDs, college visit schedules, and emergency contacts." Malcolm nodded, but his expression remained serious. "I know you two are capable, but remember what we've discussed about traveling while Black. Some people will look at you differently, make assumptions." Jerome straightened in his chair. "We know, Dad. Stay calm, be polite but firm, document everything if there's a problem." "And call me immediately if anything happens," Malcolm added, checking his watch. "I have that board meeting at 10, but I'm never too busy for you two." What neither twin knew was that 6 months ago, Malcolm had quietly acquired Atlantic Airways, the very airline they would be flying today. It was a strategic business move. The airline had been struggling, and Malcolm saw potential for growth by improving its operations and customer service. He had kept the acquisition quiet, preferring to observe the company's culture before making major changes. "I got you these," Malcolm said, sliding 2 tickets across the table. "VIP treatment." Jasmine picked one up. "First class, Dad, you didn't have to." "I want you both comfortable for your first big trip alone," Malcolm said. "But I also want you to experience how regular passengers are treated. That's why I'm not sending you on my private jet." "As if we'd want to show up to college visits on a private jet," Jerome laughed. "Talk about making an entrance." Malcolm smiled, but his eyes were thoughtful. "The real world isn't always fair, but I've taught you both how to navigate it with dignity." He stood and embraced each of them. "I'm proud of you both. Now get going before you miss your flight." As they loaded their luggage into the waiting car, Malcolm made a quick call to his assistant. "Rebecca, make sure operations knows I'll be joining the Atlantic Airways board meeting today, and have the helicopter on standby just in case." Just in case of what Sir Rebecca asked, Malcolm watched his children wave as the car pulled away. Hopefully nothing, but a father can never be too prepared. Atlanta International Airport buzzed with the chaotic energy of a busy Friday morning. Jerome and Jasmine navigated through the crowded terminal, rolling their carry-on luggage behind them. Terminal B for Atlantic Airways, Jerome confirmed, checking the digital board overhead. "We should get there with plenty of time to spare." Jasmine adjusted her backpack. "Let's hit security first. You know that's where the lines build up." The security checkpoint proved Jerome right about being Black in public spaces. Despite their neat appearance, Jerome in pressed khakis and a button-down shirt, Jasmine in a simple blue dress, they were pulled aside for random additional screening. The agent rifled through Jerome's carefully packed bag, disrupting his organized belongings while barely glancing at the white businessman who passed through the adjacent lane. "Just routine," the TSA agent said, without making eye contact. Jerome remained expressionless, though Jasmine noticed his jaw tighten. "Of course," he replied evenly. Their father's words echoed in their minds. Don't give them any excuse. 20 minutes later, they approached the Atlantic Airways check-in counter. The agent, whose name tag read Darren, looked up from his computer with a blank expression. "Good morning, Jerome," greeted politely. "We have tickets for Flight 1368 to Boston." Darren's eyes flicked between the twins, then down to their tickets. His eyebrows raised slightly at the first-class designation. "IDs, please." They produced their driver's licenses. Darren scrutinized them far longer than seemed necessary. "Is there a problem?" Jasmine asked, after an uncomfortable silence. "These are first-class tickets," Darren stated flatly. Jerome nodded. "Yes, they are. And you're checking no bags." "Just carry-ons," Jerome confirmed. Darren typed something into his computer. "One moment, please." He picked up his phone. "Brian, could you come to counter 5? I need verification on something." A middle-aged white man in a supervisor's uniform appeared moments later. He spoke quietly with Darren, both occasionally glancing at the twins. "Is everything okay with our tickets?" Jasmine asked. Brian stepped forward.
"May I ask how you obtained these tickets?"
Jerome's expression remained neutral, though his voice cooled slightly. "Our father purchased them for us." "And who is your father?" Brian pressed. "Malcolm Washington," Jerome replied. "I can show you the email confirmation if you need." Brian and Darren exchanged glances. "That won't be necessary," Brian said finally. "But there does seem to be a flag on your reservation." "A flag?" Jasmine asked. "What does that mean?" "Just a system notification," Brian explained vaguely. "Nothing to worry about. Darren will complete your check-in." Jasmine glanced over at the next counter where a white family was being checked in for the same flight. Their first-class tickets generated smiles and directions to the lounge, not supervisory consultations. "I see," she said quietly. Jerome touched her arm, a silent reminder to stay calm. Darren reluctantly finished their check-in, handing over boarding passes with barely concealed reluctance. Gate B22. Boarding starts at 1030. "Thank you," Jerome replied, with practiced courtesy. "Could you direct us to the first-class lounge?" Another hurdle awaited at the lounge entrance. The attendant, a woman named Rebecca, stopped them at the door. "First-class passengers only," she said, barely glancing at their boarding passes. "We are first-class passengers," Jasmine replied, holding up her boarding pass. Rebecca frowned, taking the pass and examining it closely. "These seem to be in order, but we've had issues with counterfeit passes recently. May I see your IDs again?" A white businessman behind them sighed impatiently. "For heaven's sake, let them in. Some of us have calls to make before boarding." Rebecca flushed, finally waving them through. "Enjoy the lounge facilities." Inside the luxurious space, Jerome guided his sister to a quiet corner. "You okay?" he asked. Jasmine took a deep breath. "Just tired of being the only ones who have to prove we belong somewhere." "I know," Jerome said, squeezing her hand. "But we're handling it exactly like Dad taught us. Document, stay calm, don't give them ammunition." "I just hope the actual flight goes smoother," Jasmine said, pulling out her phone to text their father that they'd made it through check-in. What they didn't know was that Darren had indeed flagged their reservation in the system with a vague verification needed note that would follow them to the gate. They also couldn't have known that head flight attendant Heather Reynolds was already reviewing the passenger manifest for Flight 1368, her eyes narrowing at the Washington name in the first-class section. "Atlantic Airways Flight 1368 to Boston is now boarding. We invite our first-class passengers to board at this time." Jasmine and Jerome gathered their belongings and approached the priority boarding lane. The gate area was crowded with morning business travelers, most in suits and scrolling through phones. The twins had spent their lounge time reviewing their college visit schedules, excitement building about the campus tours ahead. I can't wait to see the Spellman Library, Jasmine said as they lined up. Their African-American literature collection is supposed to be incredible. And Morehouse's business program, Jerome began, but was interrupted by a sharp voice. Excuse me. This line is for first-class passengers only. Heather Reynolds, head flight attendant for Atlantic Airways, stood blocking their path. At 45, she had been with the airline for 15 years. Her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun beneath her uniform hat, her makeup precise. What passengers couldn't see was the resentment that had been building since she'd been passed over for promotion twice in favor of younger, more diverse candidates. We have first-class tickets, Jerome explained, calmly presenting their boarding passes. Heather barely glanced at them. There must be some mistake. These seats are reserved. Other first-class passengers, mostly white executives in business attire, watched the exchange with varying degrees of interest and discomfort. There's no mistake, Jasmine replied. We checked in properly, and our boarding passes were issued for seats 3A and 3B. Heather's smile tightened. Let me see those again. She took the boarding passes, examining them with exaggerated scrutiny. Where did you get these? Our father purchased them, Jerome explained, maintaining his composure. An elderly white man in the line behind them cleared his throat. Young man, is there a problem here? His tone was kind, concerned. No problem at all, sir, Jerome replied respectfully. Just a misunderstanding about our tickets. There's no misunderstanding, Heather cut in sharply. Sir, please proceed to boarding. I'm handling this situation. The elderly man, Walter Jenkins, a retired professor, hesitated. They appear to have proper boarding passes. Heather ignored him, turning back to the twins. Our system shows these tickets have been flagged as suspicious. Suspicious? How Jasmine asked, feeling her heart rate increase. I'm not at liberty to discuss security matters, Heather replied. She motioned to the gate agent, a younger man named Tyler. These passengers need additional verification before boarding. Tyler looked uncomfortable. Their boarding passes seem valid to me, Heather. I've been with this airline 15 years, she snapped. When I say there's a problem, there's a problem. Please step aside, she instructed the twins. Jasmine, sensing trouble discreetly, began recording on her phone. Jerome maintained his calm demeanor but stood his ground. We'd like to speak to a supervisor, please. I am the supervisor on this flight, Heather stated, and I'm asking you to step out of line immediately. Passengers were now openly watching. A few had their own phones out, recording the escalating situation. What exactly is the issue with our tickets, Jerome pressed. We've checked in properly and have valid identification. Put that phone away. Heather suddenly demanded, noticing Jasmine recording. Recording airline personnel is against company policy. Actually, it isn't, Jasmine replied, having researched passenger rights for a school project. In a public area of the airport, passengers are permitted to record interactions. Heather's face flushed red. This is becoming a security issue. Either you step aside voluntarily, or I'll be forced to call airport security. Jerome pulled out his own phone. I'm going to call our father. Go ahead, Heather scoffed. In the meantime, you're not boarding this flight until we verify these tickets. Tyler, call security. Tyler hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Maybe we should just verify with the ticket office first. Now Tyler, Heather ordered. As Jerome dialed Malcolm's number, it went straight to voicemail. The board meeting had started and his phone was set to Do Not Disturb. Dad, we have a situation at the gate. The flight attendant is refusing to let us board despite having valid tickets. Call back as soon as you can. Walter, the elderly passenger, stepped forward again. I really must object to how these young people are being treated. They've shown their tickets and identification. Sir, please board the aircraft or return to the waiting area, Heather instructed coldly. This doesn't concern you. As Tyler reluctantly called security, Jasmine and Jerome exchanged worried glances. Their father had prepared them for discrimination, but not for being denied boarding entirely. With first-class passengers filing past them, the twins stood their ground, hoping the situation would resolve before security arrived. They couldn't know that their father's meeting was about to be interrupted, or that Heather Reynolds' 15-year career was approaching its final hour.
This is Flight Attendant Reynolds at Gate B22. We have 2 aggressive passengers attempting to board with fraudulent tickets. Security needed immediately.
Heather's voice was firm as she spoke into her radio eyes, locked challengingly on the Washington twins. Jerome's expression remained carefully neutral, despite the outrageous claim. We are not being aggressive, and our tickets are legitimate. Jasmine continued, recording her hand slightly shaking. We have every right to be here. Within minutes, 2 airport security officers approached Officer Barnes, a stocky white man with a crew cut, and Officer Rodriguez, a younger Latino officer. Barnes immediately positioned himself between the twins and the boarding door hand, resting on his holstered weapon. What's the situation here? Barnes demanded, addressing Heather, while barely glancing at the twins. These 2 presented suspicious first-class boarding passes. Heather explained, her voice professionally concerned. When questioned, they became confrontational. They refused to step aside for verification and are disrupting the boarding process. That's absolutely false, Jerome stated calmly. We have legitimate tickets purchased by our father. We've shown proper identification. The only disruption is coming from this flight attendant, who has prevented us from boarding without explanation. Barnes turned to the twins with immediate skepticism. IDs. Now. Rodriguez, more measured in his approach, addressed them directly. Can you explain your side of what's happening here? As Jerome provided their driver's licenses and carefully explained the situation, a small crowd had formed around them. Some passengers filmed discreetly, while others muttered among themselves. We completed normal check-in procedures, passed through security, and were in the first-class lounge without issue, Jerome explained. It was only when we attempted to board that Miss Reynolds claimed our tickets were suspicious, without specifying why. Rodriguez examined their boarding passes and IDs. These appear to be in order. Check the system, Heather insisted. The reservation was flagged. While Barnes ran their information through a tablet, Jasmine reached into her bag for a tissue. In doing so, her college acceptance letter fell to the floor. Don't move, Barnes ordered sharply as she bent to retrieve it. Heather stepped forward and deliberately placed her foot on the letter as she moved toward the desk. Sorry, she said insincerely, lifting her foot to reveal the now dirty and crumpled paper. Jerome's composure finally cracked. That's my sister's college acceptance letter. Barnes immediately stepped forward, hand returning to his weapon. Sir, lower your voice immediately. Walter, the elderly passenger who had tried to intervene earlier, stepped forward again. This is ridiculous. These young people have done nothing wrong. A businesswoman named Sophia joined him. I've been watching this whole interaction. The only person creating a disturbance is the flight attendant. Sir, ma'am, please board the aircraft or step back, Barnes ordered. Rodriguez, meanwhile, was looking increasingly uncomfortable. He quietly pointed something out to Barnes. The system just shows a verification flag from check-in. No specific security concern is noted. Barnes ignored him. We need to move this situation away from the gate. Boarding is in progress. Are we being detained? Jerome asked directly. Because if not, we have valid tickets and should be allowed to board. You're being temporarily held for questioning regarding potentially fraudulent boarding documents, Barnes stated. This is absolutely discriminatory, Jasmine said, her voice shaking but determined. We've shown valid identification and tickets. The only reason we're being questioned is because we're black. Heather gasped dramatically. That is absolutely not true. This is about security protocols. Jerome, seeing the situation deteriorating, sent a text message to their family lawyer and another to their father, with their emergency code phrase, Atlanta Situation Red. As Barnes instructed the twins to move to a security office, their flight began boarding the remaining passengers. Jasmine, tears now streaming down her face, clutched her damaged acceptance letter. Jerome placed a protective arm around his sister while keeping his phone recording in his pocket. What do you think about how this situation is unfolding? Comment number 1 if you believe the twins are handling this situation with remarkable composure. Comment number 2 if you think Heather is completely abusing her power. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of their race. Subscribe to see more stories about standing up against discrimination. But wait, what happened to the twins' father? Will Malcolm receive their emergency message in time? And what consequences await Heather when the airline owner discovers how his children are being treated? The most shocking part of this story is just ahead. In the Atlantic Airways corporate headquarters downtown, Malcolm Washington sat at the head of a polished conference table surrounded by airline executives. 6 months into his acquisition of the struggling carrier, this was his first formal meeting with the full executive team. He had deliberately maintained a low profile, observing operations and corporate culture before implementing changes. Passenger satisfaction scores remained 15% below industry average, Malcolm noted, flipping through a report. Our on-time performance has improved, but customer complaints about staff interactions are concerning. Patricia Winters, VP of Operations, nodded. We've identified several areas for improvement, particularly in... Malcolm's phone buzzed quietly in his pocket. He normally silenced it during meetings, but the twins' trip had him on high alert. Glancing down, he saw Jerome's Atlanta Situation Red text. Without hesitation, Malcolm stood. I apologize, but we need to end this meeting immediately. An emergency requires my attention. The executives exchanged confused glances. Mr. Washington, we haven't discussed the new route proposals, objected CFO Richard Downing. They'll have to wait, Malcolm replied, already dialing his assistant. Rebecca, contact Atlantic Operations. Flight 1368 to Boston needs to be held at the gate. No departure clearance is to be issued. Sir, Rebecca sounded confused. On what authority? On the authority of the airline's owner, Malcolm stated firmly, making eye contact with the stunned executives, and have the company helicopter ready in 5 minutes. Hanging up, Malcolm addressed the silent room. I purchased Atlantic Airways 6 months ago through Washington Holdings. My children are currently being prevented from boarding Flight 1368 despite having valid first-class tickets. I intend to find out why. He strode from the room, leaving behind a table of shocked executives who suddenly understood why their mysterious new owner had been asking so many questions about company culture and customer treatment. Meanwhile, at Gate B-22, confusion reigned. Jasmine and Jerome stood flanked by security officers as the final boarding call was announced. Jasmine wiped tears from her cheeks while Jerome maintained his protective stance beside her. The flight is being held for a security matter, announced Tyler, the uncomfortable gate agent. Heather checked her watch impatiently. We need to depart. Captain Reynolds is asking for an update. What none of the ground staff knew was that Captain Michael Reynolds was Heather's husband, a connection that had often allowed her special privileges. The twins' phones and IDs had been taken by Officer Barnes, despite Rodriguez's growing discomfort with the situation. Protocol, Barnes had claimed, though Rodriguez couldn't cite any such protocol. My sister needs medical attention, Jerome insisted, noting Jasmine's increasing anxiety. She has a panic disorder, and this situation is triggering an attack. We'll get medical after we complete processing, Barnes replied dismissively. A commotion at the end of the terminal drew attention as Captain Reynolds himself approached, his uniform crisp and authoritative. What's the delay? Heather, we're 20 minutes behind schedule. These two presented suspicious tickets, Heather explained, gesturing to the twins. When questioned, they became confrontational. Captain Reynolds surveyed the scene, two well-dressed teenagers surrounded by security, one clearly in distress. Suspicious how exactly? Before Heather could answer Diana Chen, the airport operations manager arrived.
What's happening here? I'm getting calls about a held flight and a possible discrimination incident.
Discrimination? Heather scoffed. Absolutely not. These individuals attempted to board with first-class tickets that were flagged in our system. When asked to verify their tickets, they refused. That's not true, Jerome stated firmly. We presented valid tickets and identification. We were singled out while other passengers boarded without question. Diana turned to Tyler. What exactly was the flag in the system? Tyler checked his terminal. Just a verification needed note from check-in. No security threats or fraud alerts. Then why are these passengers being detained rather than simply verifying their tickets? Diana asked. Heather's composure slipped slightly.
People like you wouldn't understand. First class has standards.
These two clearly don't belong there. A shocked silence followed her slip. People like us, Jasmine repeated, her voice strengthening despite her tears. Captain Reynolds looked sharply at his wife. Heather, that was completely inappropriate. Barnes shifted uncomfortably as his radio crackled. Security Chief Phillips wants an update on the situation at B-22. The airport's social media manager approached Diana, speaking quietly. Ma'am, videos of this incident are going viral. Number Atlanta airport racism is trending locally. As the situation spiraled further out of control, Malcolm Washington's helicopter was touching down at the executive terminal across the airfield. Airport Director Gregory Pierce waited on the tarmac, having been summoned urgently. Mr. Washington Gregory greeted him, shouting over the whirring blades. "We have a car waiting." "What's the current situation?" Malcolm asked, as they hurried to the vehicle. Two young passengers detained at Gate B-22. Social media is calling it racial profiling. Atlantic Airways staff involved. I didn't realize they were your children. Few people know I acquired the airline, Malcolm explained grimly, checking his phone. A video of the incident is already online. Patricia Winters, who had followed Malcolm from headquarters, joined them in the car. I just spoke with our gate supervisor. This is a complete disaster, Mr. Washington. Malcolm watched the video, his expression darkening. Get me to that gate immediately and contact our legal team. As their car sped toward Terminal B, the twins were being escorted away from the gate area. Jasmine's panic attack had worsened, prompting a reluctant call for medical assistance. Jerome, now separated from his sister, found himself in handcuffs despite having shown no aggression. This is completely unnecessary, Rodriguez protested to Barnes. They're cooperative teenagers, not threats. Protocol, Barnes repeated stubbornly, though his confidence was clearly wavering as the situation escalated beyond what a simple ticket verification should have been. Security Chief Phillips arrived immediately, sensing a situation spiraling out of control. What's the status here? Sir, Rodriguez spoke before Barnes. Could we have two minors detained for a ticket verification issue that could have been resolved at the gate? One is having a medical episode, and the other has been handcuffed without cause. Phillips looked alarmed. Release him immediately. Where's the sister? Medical is with her in the first aid room, Rodriguez reported. As Jerome's handcuffs were removed, Captain Reynolds approached Phillips. This whole situation is unnecessary. As captain of this flight, I'm requesting an immediate resolution so we can depart. And I'm requesting a full explanation of why my children have been detained, handcuffed, and separated, came a commanding voice from behind them. Malcolm Washington had arrived. Malcolm Washington's entrance into the crowded security office created an immediate shift in atmosphere. Dressed in an impeccable charcoal suit, his commanding presence drew every eye in the room. Though furious, he projected a controlled calm that was somehow more intimidating than anger would have been. Dad Jerome exclaimed relief, washing over his face as he rubbed his wrists where the handcuffs had left marks. Malcolm's eyes quickly assessed his son, noting the restraint marks and disheveled appearance before scanning the room. "Where is your sister?" "Medical took her to the first aid station," Jerome explained. "She had a panic attack when they separated us." Malcolm turned to Security Chief Phillips. "I want to see my daughter immediately. Then we'll discuss why my children were treated like criminals for attempting to use tickets I purchased." Phillips, recognizing the gravity of the situation, nodded quickly. "Of course, sir. Officer Rodriguez will escort you." "And you are?" Malcolm asked, his tone making it clear he expected a complete explanation. "James Phillips, Airport Security Chief." "Mr. Washington, I assure you, we're investigating what happened here." Malcolm nodded curtly before turning to Patricia Winters, who had followed him in. "Patricia, please remain with Jerome and gather statements from everyone involved. Record everything." Airport Director Gregory appeared at Malcolm's shoulder. "The first aid station is this way, Mr. Washington." As they moved through the terminal, Gregory attempted damage control. "Mr. Washington, on behalf of the Airport Authority, I want to express our deepest—" "Not now," Malcolm cut him off. "My priority is my children. We'll discuss accountability after I've ensured they're safe." In the first aid room, they found Jasmine sitting on an examination table, a paramedic checking her vitals. Though her breathing had normalized, her eyes were red from crying and her hands still trembled slightly. "Daddy," she cried upon seeing him immediately breaking into fresh tears. Malcolm was at her side in an instant, embracing her protectively. "I'm here now. You're safe." "They wouldn't listen," Jasmine sobbed. "We showed our tickets, our IDs, everything. That flight attendant just kept saying we didn't belong there." Malcolm's jaw tightened as he stroked his daughter's hair. "I know, sweetheart. I saw the video." "She stepped on my Spellman acceptance letter," Jasmine added, her voice small. The paramedic respectfully stepped back. "She's stable now. Blood pressure was elevated but is returning to normal. I'd recommend rest and fluids." Malcolm nodded his thanks before turning back to his daughter. "Can you walk? I want to get you and your brother together again." As they returned to the security office, Malcolm maintained a protective arm around Jasmine. The crowd outside had grown with curious passengers and airport staff gathering at a distance. Several news crews had arrived, alerted by the viral videos circulating online. Inside the office, Jerome immediately embraced his sister. Malcolm surveyed the room, taking note of everyone present. Patricia documenting statements, Officer Rodriguez looking concerned, Officer Barnes standing stiffly by the wall, and Security Chief Phillips attempting to maintain order. A newcomer entered, Captain Michael Reynolds, his pilot's uniform, a stark contrast to the security uniform surrounding him. "Mr. Washington," he began, extending his hand. "I'm Captain Reynolds. I want to personally apologize for the treatment your children received." Before Malcolm could respond, Heather Reynolds pushed her way into the already crowded room. "Michael, the passengers are getting restless. We need a decision on departure." She froze upon seeing Malcolm. "And you are?" Malcolm asked, though he had already guessed from the captain's reaction. "Heather Reynolds, head flight attendant," she replied, composing herself. "Sir, while I sympathize with your children's situation, we have a flight schedule to maintain." Captain Reynolds winced at his wife's tone. "Heather, this is Malcolm Washington." Malcolm introduced himself. "Father of the passengers you prevented from boarding." Heather's expression remained unmoved. "Mr. Washington, these passengers presented tickets that were flagged in our system. I was following protocol." "What specific protocol explains handcuffing a cooperative?" 17-year-old Malcolm inquired, his voice dangerously quiet. "That was security's decision, not mine," Heather deflected. Officer Barnes shifted uncomfortably. The situation was escalating. The only person escalating anything was her. Jerome interjected, pointing at Heather. Malcolm raised a hand, silencing the room. "I'd like to see the security footage." Phillips nodded to a technician who pulled up the gate camera feed on a monitor. In silence, they watched the entire interaction unfold. The twins presenting their tickets, Heather's immediate confrontation, the twins' composed responses, and Heather's escalating hostility. When the video showed Heather deliberately stepping on Jasmine's college acceptance letter, several people in the room inhaled sharply. "That appears intentional," Patricia noted, still documenting everything. "It was an accident," Heather insisted. Malcolm remained silent until the video ended. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "Chief Phillips, I want a complete incident report. Officer Rodriguez, thank you for attempting to de-escalate the situation. Officer Barnes, we'll discuss your actions separately." He turned to Captain Reynolds. "Captain, I understand you have passengers waiting. I suggest you return to your aircraft." "And the flight?" Captain Reynolds asked hesitantly. "Will depart as soon as a replacement for Miss Reynolds can be found," Malcolm stated. "She will not be serving on this flight." Heather's eyes widened. "You can't do that. Only airline management can." "I am airline management," Malcolm interrupted. "More specifically, I own Atlantic Airways." The room fell silent. Heather's face drained of color. "That's impossible. The airline is owned by a holding company." "Washington Holdings," Malcolm confirmed. "My company." Captain Reynolds paled. "Mr. Washington, I had no idea." "I believe you," Captain Malcolm assured him. "Now please, return to your aircraft. Our operations team will arrange a replacement flight attendant immediately." As Captain Reynolds departed, Heather remained frozen in place. "This is some kind of joke. You can't be." Miss Reynolds, Patricia interrupted. "I am the Vice President of Operations for Atlantic Airways. I can confirm that Mr. Washington is indeed our owner and CEO." Malcolm turned to his children. "Are you two feeling up to continuing your trip today? We can reschedule if needed." Jerome looked at Jasmine, who nodded determinedly. "We want to go. We've been looking forward to these college visits." "I'd rather not fly with them," Jasmine added, quietly glancing at Heather. "You won't have to," Malcolm assured her. "My jet is fueled and ready. We'll get you to Boston in style after all." He turned back to the stunned group. "Now let's discuss the consequences of today's events." The tension in the security office was palpable as Malcolm Washington stood at the center, his calm demeanor belying the anger he felt. He had deliberately not identified himself, immediately wanting to observe how airport and airline staff would handle a discrimination complaint without knowing who they were dealing with. "Let's be perfectly clear about what happened today." Malcolm began, his voice measured but authoritative. "My children presented valid first-class tickets, purchased legally, and were subjected to harassment, public humiliation, and detention solely because of how they look." Heather shifted uncomfortably but maintained her defensive posture. This had nothing to do with their appearance. Their reservation was flagged in the system. Malcolm turned to Tyler, the gate agent, who had been silently observing from the corner. "What exactly did this flag state?" Tyler swallowed nervously. "Just verification needed, sir. It was added during check-in." "And did you attempt to verify their tickets through the appropriate channels?" "I wanted to," Tyler admitted, "but Miss Reynolds insisted on calling security immediately." Malcolm nodded thoughtfully before addressing Officer Barnes. "And you, officer, decided handcuffs were necessary for a calm, cooperative teenager who presented valid ID and tickets." Barnes straightened defensively. "Sir, in security situations." "This was never a security situation," Malcolm interrupted. "The security footage clearly shows two young adults attempting to board a flight for which they had valid tickets. At any point, a simple call to the ticket office would have confirmed their reservation." Security Chief Phillips stepped forward. "Mr. Washington, I want to assure you that Officer Barnes' actions do not reflect our department's standard procedures." "Yet they reflect something, don't they?" Malcolm replied. "A bias, perhaps unconscious, that made a verification needed note escalate into a detention, separation, and handcuffing of minors." Malcolm moved to comfort Jasmine, who was still visibly shaken. "My daughter's college acceptance letter was deliberately damaged. She experienced a panic attack severe enough to require medical attention. My son was handcuffed without cause. He turned his attention fully to Heather. Miss Reynolds, throughout your 15 years with Atlantic Airways, have you questioned other first-class passengers about the validity of their tickets with the same vigor? I treat all passengers according to company policy, Heather insisted. Patricia Winters, who had been reviewing her tablet, looked up. That's interesting, Miss Reynolds, because I'm reviewing passenger complaints right now. There appears to be a pattern of selective enforcement when it comes to certain passengers. Heather's composure finally cracked. This is absurd. You can't possibly. The door opened and Andrea Thompson, Malcolm's lawyer, entered. Mr. Washington, I've reviewed the preliminary information. We have multiple grounds for action here. Malcolm introduced her. This is Andrea Thompson, Washington Holdings Chief Counsel. Andrea nodded professionally. Based on the security footage and witness statements, we're looking at potential civil rights violations, assault in the case of the deliberately damaged document, false imprisonment, and defamation. Heather paled further. Assault? That's ridiculous. I accidentally stepped on a piece of paper. The video suggests otherwise. Andrea replied coolly, but that will be for others to determine. Captain Reynolds returned, having arranged for his co-pilot to prepare for departure. His expression was grim as he approached Malcolm. Mr. Washington, I want to personally apologize for this situation. I had no idea my wife. He stopped, clearly struggling for words. I appreciate that, Captain Malcolm replied, but I'm curious. Did you know about your wife's history of discriminatory behavior toward passengers? Michael, don't answer that, Heather interjected. This man is trying to intimidate us. For all we know, he's lying about owning the airline. Airport Director Gregory, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. Miss Reynolds, I can personally confirm Mr. Washington's identity. His acquisition of Atlantic Airways was confidential but entirely legitimate. This is still America, Heather declared, grasping at straws. You can't fire someone just because you don't like how they did their job. You're right, Malcolm agreed, surprisingly. That's why you're suspended pending investigation, not fired. Yet, he turned to Patricia. Miss Winters, please begin formal proceedings according to company policy. I want a complete review of Miss Reynolds' employment history, focusing on passenger complaints and any previous incidents similar to today's. Already initiated, Patricia confirmed. I've also arranged for a replacement flight attendant for Flight 1368. Malcolm addressed Chief Phillips next. I expect a full investigation into Officer Barnes's conduct as well. Officer Rodriguez, however, appears to have attempted to follow proper procedure throughout this incident. Phillips nodded grimly. We'll conduct a thorough review, Mr. Washington. Malcolm finally turned his full attention to his children. Jerome, Jasmine, are you ready to go? The helicopter is waiting to take us to my jet. What about the other passengers? Jerome asked, ever thoughtful, even after his ordeal. Malcolm smiled proudly at his son's consideration. Patricia will ensure they're taken care of. In fact, he turned to Patricia. Please upgrade any passengers who were in line behind my children and witnessed this incident, and issue travel vouchers to everyone on the flight for the delay. Of course, Patricia agreed. As Malcolm guided his children toward the door, Heather made one final desperate attempt. You're just another entitled rich man thinking you can buy your way out of following rules. Those tickets were flagged. Malcolm stopped, turning slowly. Miss Reynolds first started my career as a baggage handler at this very airport. I worked every job, from ground crew to customer service, before starting my logistics company. I know airline procedures better than you ever will. His voice remained calm but carried throughout the now silent room. The tickets were flagged because people like you see young black passengers in first class and automatically assume they don't belong there. That flag wasn't about security, it was about bias. He looked around the room, addressing everyone present. What happened today isn't just about my children. It's about a culture that needs to change. And as the owner of Atlantic Airways, I intend to ensure that change happens." As they left the security office, Malcolm placed a protective arm around each of his children.
"I'm so proud of how you both handled yourselves today."
"We did exactly what you taught us," Jerome replied. "But it still wasn't enough, was it?" Jasmine asked quietly. "We were still treated like criminals." Malcolm stopped turning to face his children directly. "Listen to me. What happened today wasn't because you did anything wrong. It was because some people still judge others based on appearance rather than character. But remember this, you responded with dignity and strength. And now, you have the power to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else." As they walked through the terminal toward the executive exit, the stares of other travelers followed them, some curious, some supportive, some filming on their phones. What had begun as a simple trip to visit colleges had turned into a powerful lesson about privilege, prejudice, and the long road still ahead toward true equality. Behind them, Heather Reynolds watched the full weight of her actions and their consequences finally beginning to sink in. Within an hour of the incident, Malcolm Washington's private jet was airborne, carrying Jasmine and Jerome toward Boston. In the luxurious cabin, a doctor Malcolm had summoned checked Jasmine's vital signs one final time. "She's fine physically," the doctor confirmed. "Just make sure she stays hydrated and rests." Malcolm thanked him before joining his children in the main cabin. Jasmine had finally stopped trembling, though her expression remained subdued. Jerome sat beside her, his protective instincts still on high alert. "How are you feeling?" Malcolm asked, taking the seat across from them. "Better," Jasmine replied quietly. "Just embarrassed that everyone saw me fall apart like that." "You have nothing to be embarrassed about," Malcolm assured her. "Panic attacks are a normal response to extremely stressful situations. What matters is that you stood your ground until it became too much." Jerome nodded in agreement. "You were amazing, Jazz. Even when that woman was being completely unreasonable, you kept it together longer than most people would have." Malcolm studied his children with a mixture of pride and sadness. "I always knew you'd face situations like this. I just hoped." He sighed. "I hoped my position might somehow shield you." "But that's not really what you've taught us, is it, Dad?" Jerome observed. "You've always said that respect is earned by who we are, not what we have. And that we should never use your name or money to get special treatment," Jasmine added. Malcolm smiled ruefully. "You're right. Though today I have to admit I was tempted to announce who I was the moment I arrived." "Why didn't you?" Jerome asked. "Because I wanted to see how they'd handle the situation without knowing. It revealed their true characters." Malcolm's expression turned serious. "And it showed me exactly what needs to change at Atlantic Airways." Back at Atlanta International Airport, the consequences were already unfolding. In the Atlantic Airways Operations Center, Patricia Winters addressed the staff gathered for an emergency meeting. "As most of you have heard, we had a serious incident today involving racial profiling of 2 passengers who happened to be the children of our owner Malcolm Washington," she began. "Mr. Washington has authorized me to implement immediate changes." She gestured to a stern-looking woman beside her. "This is Dr. Elise Thompson, who will be joining us as Atlantic Airways' new Chief Diversity Officer. Starting tomorrow, all gate and cabin staff will undergo mandatory anti-bias training before returning to duty." Murmurs spread through the assembled employees. Additionally, Patricia continued, "Heather Reynolds has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Officer Barnes from Airport Security is also under review. Captain Reynolds will continue flying but has been removed from supervisory duties until further notice." In another part of the airport, Security Chief Phillips was having a similar conversation with his team. "What happened today was a complete failure of protocol," he stated bluntly. "A verification needed note should never escalate to detention and handcuffs without evidence of an actual threat." He turned to Officer Rodriguez. "Rodriguez, Your attempts to follow proper procedure and de-escalate the situation have been noted. Effective immediately, I'm appointing you to head our new passenger advocacy program. You'll work directly with airline representatives to ensure passengers' rights are respected during security incidents. Rodriguez looked surprised but nodded his acceptance. As for Officer Barnes Phillips continued, he'll be on administrative leave pending review of his actions today and previous incidents. Barnes, seated at the back of the room, stared at the floor. Meanwhile, the news of the incident had spread rapidly. Number Atlanta Airport racism and number flying while black were trending nationally. Video footage from multiple passengers had been combined into a damning montage that showed the entire sequence of events, from check-in to detention. In the Atlantic Airways PR department, phones rang constantly as media outlets sought comments. The company's social media managers worked frantically to address the flood of angry messages. At Boston Logan International Airport, Malcolm's jet touched down just as the story broke on national news networks. As they disembarked, Malcolm received a call from Patricia. "It's everywhere, sir," she reported. "Every major network is covering it. Atlantic Airways is being hammered on social media." "Have we issued a statement?" Malcolm asked, guiding his children toward a waiting car. "A preliminary one apologizing for the incident and promising a full investigation. But they want to hear from you directly." Malcolm considered this. "Arrange a press conference for tomorrow morning at headquarters. In the meantime, I want you to contact everyone who was on that flight or waiting at the gate. Compensate them for their troubles and thank those who tried to intervene." After ending the call, Malcolm turned to his children. "Your college visits start tomorrow. Are you still up for it?" Both nodded, determination in their eyes. "What's going to happen to that flight attendant?" Jerome asked. And the security officer, Jasmine, added. Malcolm's expression was resolute. "They'll receive due process according to company and airport policies. But I promise you, both what happened today will have lasting consequences, not just for them, but for how Atlantic Airways operates moving forward." As their car pulled away from the terminal, Malcolm made another call, this time to Walter Jenkins, the elderly passenger who had attempted to intervene. "Mr. Jenkins, this is Malcolm Washington. I understand you tried to help my children today at the airport." "I didn't do nearly enough," Walter replied regretfully. "I should have been more insistent." "You did more than most," Malcolm assured him. "And I'd like to thank you personally. Would you be available for dinner while I'm in Boston?" In Atlanta, Heather Reynolds sat in her living room staring blankly at the television where her face was being shown repeatedly as part of the news coverage. Her phone had been ringing non-stop, colleagues, friends, even her mother calling to ask what had happened. Captain Reynolds entered, having just returned from his Boston flight. His expression was a mixture of anger and disappointment. 15 years, he said quietly. 15 years you've worked for this airline and you throw it all away because you couldn't believe 2 black teenagers belonged in first class. "Michael, it wasn't like that." Heather protested weakly. Their reservation was flagged. "Stop it," he interrupted. "I saw the security footage. You singled them out from the moment they approached the gate. And now," he gestured to the television, "now you've not only ruined your career, but damaged mine as well. I've been removed from the supervisory rotation, pending an investigation into whether I've been giving you preferential treatment." Heather's face crumpled as the full impact of her actions finally hit home. "What are we going to do?" Captain Reynolds shook his head. "I don't know what you're going to do, but I need to seriously reconsider our relationship if this is who you really are." As night fell, Malcolm sat with his children in their Boston hotel suite, reviewing their college visit itinerary for the next day. Despite the trauma of the day, both twins were determined to move forward with their plans. "You know," Malcolm said thoughtfully, "sometimes the worst experiences lead to the most important changes. What happened today was terrible, but it might just transform Atlantic Airways for the better." and maybe help other people like us who just want to travel without being treated like criminals," Jasmine added. Jerome nodded in agreement. "So, in a way, Heather Reynolds did us all a favor." Malcolm laughed. "I wouldn't go that far. But yes, sometimes it takes a crisis to catalyze real change. And tomorrow, when we announce the new Atlantic Airways Passenger Bill of Rights and anti-discrimination policies, we'll be taking a small but significant step toward making sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else." As they prepared for bed, Jasmine carefully smoothed out her crumpled Spellman acceptance letter. "I'm still going to frame this," she declared. "It's part of our story now." Malcolm hugged his daughter, his heart swelling with pride at her resilience. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight he was simply grateful that his children were safe and that they had handled adversity with the dignity and strength he had always tried to instill in them. 1 month later, the grand ballroom of the Atlantic Airways headquarters buzzed with anticipation. Journalists, airline industry representatives, and civil rights advocates filled the rows of chairs facing a podium emblazoned with the company's newly redesigned logo. Behind the scenes, Malcolm Washington reviewed his notes one final time. "Ready, Dad?" Jerome asked, straightening his tie. Malcolm nodded. "More than ready. This should have happened long before either of you had to experience what you did." The past month had been transformative for Atlantic Airways. Following the incident, Malcolm had accelerated changes he'd been planning since acquiring the company, using the viral moment as a catalyst for industry-wide reform. Patricia Winters appeared at Malcolm's side. "We're set to begin, sir. Full media presence, including national networks. Dr. Thompson is ready to present the training program details. And our special guests, all seated in the front row," Patricia confirmed. Malcolm took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage, accompanied by Jasmine and Jerome. The room fell silent as he approached the podium. "Good morning," he began. "1 month ago, my children attempted to board an Atlantic Airways flight using valid first-class tickets I had purchased for them. What should have been a routine trip became a public spectacle of racial profiling that unfortunately reflects experiences many travelers of color face daily." He gestured to his children. Jasmine and Jerome handled the situation with remarkable dignity. Dignity they should never have had to summon, simply to use services they had paid for. Malcolm's gaze swept across the audience. "Today, I'm not here to dwell on that incident, but to announce how Atlantic Airways is transforming because of it." He revealed a comprehensive set of changes, including a new passenger bill of rights, mandatory anti-bias training for all employees, and an independent review board for discrimination complaints. "I'd like to introduce Dr. Elise Thompson, our new Chief Diversity Officer, who will oversee these initiatives." Malcolm announced, gesturing to a distinguished black woman who joined him at the podium. Dr. Thompson outlined the training program. All Atlantic Airways staff would undergo a program that featured Jasmine and Jerome's experience as a teaching case study. By sharing their story, Dr. Thompson explained, "The Washington family has given us a powerful tool to help airline employees recognize and correct bias in real time." Malcolm returned to the podium. "I'd also like to recognize former security officer Miguel Rodriguez, who has agreed to head our new passenger advocacy program." Rodriguez stood to applause. In the months since the incident, he had emerged as an outspoken advocate for security reform, resigning from his position to join Atlantic Airways full-time. Officer Rodriguez attempted to follow proper procedures and de-escalate the situation when others were escalating it. Malcolm acknowledged. His actions remind us that being an ally means speaking up even when it's difficult. The presentation continued with Patricia outlining operational changes designed to prevent similar incidents. Finally, Malcolm invited several special guests to join him on stage. Walter Jenkins and Sophia Chen, he introduced, were passengers who attempted to intervene when they witnessed my children being mistreated. Their willingness to speak up exemplifies the responsibility we all share to stand against injustice. Walter, the elderly professor who had questioned Heather's treatment of the twins, nodded humbly. I only wish I had done more. Sometimes, a single voice of dissent can make all the difference, Malcolm replied. Which is why Atlantic Airways will be establishing the Jenkins Chen Courage Award for employees who demonstrate exceptional moral courage in challenging situations. As the presentation concluded, Malcolm addressed the questions on everyone's mind. Many have asked about the employment status of those involved in the incident. Following thorough investigations, both Heather Reynolds and Security Officer Barnes have been terminated. Their actions violated not only company policy but basic human dignity. He paused before continuing. Captain Michael Reynolds, who was not present during the initial incident, has completed our new training program and continues to fly with Atlantic Airways, having demonstrated his commitment to our new standards. After the formal presentation, Malcolm met with journalists for a more intimate Q&A session. One reporter raised her hand. "Mr. Washington, critics suggest you're using your wealth and position to make an example of these employees. How do you respond?" Malcolm considered the question carefully. "I'm using my position to address a systemic problem that affects countless travelers who don't have my resources. The employees in question weren't terminated because they mistreated Malcolm Washington's children. They were terminated because they mistreated passengers, in violation of both policy and basic human decency." Another journalist followed up. "Has there been any personal resolution between your family and Miss Reynolds?" "Miss Reynolds has not offered an apology, nor have we sought one," Malcolm replied candidly. "This isn't about personal reconciliation but systemic change. However, my children have shown remarkable grace throughout this process." As the event wrapped up, the Washington family prepared to depart. Jasmine and Jerome had started their freshman years at Spelman and Morehouse, respectively, flying back for this special occasion. "We have a surprise for you, Dad," Jasmine announced as they entered Malcolm's office for a private moment before heading to the airport. Jerome produced a beautifully framed document, Jasmine's restored Spelman acceptance letter, mounted alongside a family photograph taken at her orientation. "We wanted you to have this for your office," Jerome explained, "to remember that something good came from what happened." Malcolm accepted the frame, emotion evident in his eyes. "This means more than you know." "There's something else," Jasmine added with a smile. "I've changed my major. I'm going into aviation management with a focus on passenger advocacy law." Malcolm raised an eyebrow in surprise. "That's quite a specific path." "Let's just say I found my calling," Jasmine replied, "and Spelman has agreed to let me work with Atlantic Airways on developing their new curriculum for aviation ethics." As they prepared to leave for the airport, this time on Malcolm's private jet, Jerome noticed his father gazing thoughtfully at the framed letter. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" he asked. Malcolm smiled. "I'm thinking about how proud I am of you both, and how sometimes the most painful experiences lead to the most important changes." Later that evening, Malcolm sat in the pilot's seat of his jet, preparing for takeoff with his children safely aboard. As the engines hummed to life, he reflected on the journey of the past month. A journey that had begun with discrimination, but was ending with transformation. The incident had been painful, but the response had created ripples throughout the industry. 3 other major airlines had already announced similar initiatives, and congressional hearings on discrimination in commercial aviation were scheduled for the following month. As the jet accelerated down the runway and lifted into the evening sky, Malcolm knew that their family story had become something larger, a catalyst for change that would benefit countless travelers who simply wanted the dignity of equal treatment when they boarded a plane. The twins had learned a difficult but valuable lesson. Sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone who comes after you. And in that knowledge was a power greater than any they might have claimed by simply announcing their father owned the airline. What do you think about how this story ended? Could Malcolm's response to discrimination change how the airline industry treats all passengers? Comment below with your thoughts on how we can all work toward a more equitable world. If you believe in standing up against discrimination wherever you see it, hit that like button. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about justice and transformation, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes our most painful experiences can lead to the most powerful positive changes, not just for ourselves, but for everyone. This powerful story teaches us that racial discrimination can happen anywhere, even to those with privilege and resources. The Washington twins faced prejudice despite their first-class tickets, showing how racism often overrides status. Malcolm's response demonstrates that true change requires both personal courage and systemic action. By transforming his company's policies, Malcolm used his position to create lasting impact beyond his family's experience. The story reminds us that standing up against injustice isn't just about personal vindication. It's about creating safer spaces for everyone who follows. When witnesses like Walter and Sophia intervened, they showed that allyship matters, even if it feels insufficient. Most importantly, Jasmine and Jerome's dignity throughout their ordeal reveals how resilience in the face of discrimination can become a catalyst for transformation, turning painful experiences into powerful change. What would you have done if you witnessed the discrimination that Jasmine and Jerome faced? Would you have spoken up like Walter and Sophia, or remained silent? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe in standing against racial injustice wherever it appears, hit that like button to help spread this important message. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about overcoming discrimination and creating positive change. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to understand the reality of racism in everyday situations. Thank you for watching, and remember, your voice matters in the fight for equality, even when it feels like just a whisper in the crowd.